I'm Father Val Peter, the caretaker of Father Flanagan Stream and the executive director of Boys Town. Does Boys Town really exist, people ask me? You bet it does.
Located in the heartland of America, Boys Town youth have come from many backgrounds and locales. As they graduate, they shall seek new adventures and head for different places. But always, they shall carry with them the spirit of Boys Town. If you'd like to help Boys Town, send your tax-deductible gift to Father Val Peter, Boys Town, Nebraska, 68010.
This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people have so much to gain and have such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come above boards to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
These people are in very high positions, yeah. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 26. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we're going to lay down the third installment in our /?? Creepypasta series, the Contra series. So we're going to lay down today Contra 3, but really in a way, this case that we're going to be discussing, this scandal from the 1980s is, I don't know, I feel at least subjectively, personally for me, is like even bigger than Iran-Contra in terms of the horrors and the level of evil that is kind of contained in it, and the extent to which it was covered up, because of course lots of things surrounding Iran-Contra in the 80s were covered up, but this one is such a sort of outrageous case, and a lot of, I think we've like alluded to it multiple times in previous episodes before, but
this is also like, I think, where a lot of threads start to kind of come together, because this is sort of the union of some of the like satanic like stuff, like in the Satanic Panic era stuff, with the Iran-Contra stuff, like the two kind of worlds of like the more maybe like Aquino world, the spookier, murkier kind of world of like occult crimes and things like that. Starts to like blend in with some of this more, JFK style, Oliver Stone type conspiracy.
And we might add, even in a very, very bold way, the kind of VIP pedophile ring or pedophile network kind of scandals that we brought up.
Yeah, I guess that's true. There isn't really a pedo element to... Well, this maybe is like one example of the pedo element.
Honestly, the whole Satanic Panic thing and Aquino's career both were tainted with like the brush of like, organized pedophilia rings and satanic abuse rings, but this is the first time...
that's kind of like part and parcel of Satanism in the like 90s sense of like, they're literally abusing kids, folks, but so that ties that whole wave.
But really like but really I think as we start to look at it, almost like a proto-Epstein kind of scandal, and very similar also to Den, which we talked about, the Digital Entertainment Network, and kind of using these like high-flying businessmen to throw lavish parties and while they're embezzling tons of money from investors and perhaps doing certain kinds of money laundering, and then offering up like underage boys and girls to wealthy, powerful people to either sweeten the deal or perhaps blackmail them or perhaps both, and perhaps even compromise politicians, political figures, law enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things that we would see later on in other scandals all kind of converge on this bizarre inflection point of Omaha, Nebraska in the 1980s. And so today, and it's hard to understate, like, I think, well, like I said, my subjective, the subjective importance that this case has had in sort of my journey, I guess, into the realm of the paranoid and the parapolitical, because this scandal, the Franklin Credit Union scandal, the Larry King scandal, was kind of the first thing that I saw back in maybe like 2011, so almost a decade ago, before I had heard anything about, Epstein, before I really knew a ton about Iran-Contra, or before I knew about Michael Aquino, and all that stuff. I think we talked in the Aquino episode about how earth-shattering it was to like discover this figure was actually real, this like bizarre Satanist psyop guy. And I think even though, it's interesting, like I came to it through the way probably a lot of people do, which is like this documentary that was supposed to air on the Discovery Channel that was made by a British documentary crew called Conspiracy of Silence. And you can still find this on YouTube in various like pirated forms. The only version that exists of it is like a sort of like a fine cut VHS rip with certain scenes and shots kind of missing. It's about like 75% done, but it still has an impact. And kind of amazingly, it uses as filler music all the songs from Twin Peaks, which ends up being very apropos. That. Oh yeah, it definitely does. That kind of weird synthy, like the that kind of thing that would constantly play like on a loop throughout Twin Peaks.
This is the true story of Lawrence King. It is the story of an evil at the heart of America, of a cover-up at the highest level. One man is attempting to uncover the full story. John DeCamp is among the most highly decorated Vietnam veterans. A former Republican state senator in Lincoln, Nebraska, he is now a lawyer fighting the legacy of Lawrence King's evil network.
It's a web of intrigue that starts in our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, the worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
Right. And it's interesting how popular Twin Peaks is, just as a little side note, in that it kind of suggests this dark world in late 80s, early 90s America of secret brothels and like all the rich guys and they're, in communion with like a dark entity named Bob and all this stuff. But then, it's weird that it's kind of always portrayed as just coming out of like David Lynch's like crazy imagination and not actually materially like referencing anything that was happening maybe in the real world.
I mean, well, I feel like we've talked about this like type of stuff before, but I feel like there's a lot of movies like that, like Eyes Wide Shut, is the typical example. I think I mentioned The Ninth Gate in the past, one of Polanski's slightly more obscure, I guess, the more obscure of his two Satanism movies. There's a couple. Twin Peaks has elements of that. I think there's a lot of things where, like, you know, people kind of hint at the idea of this once it gets into the popular discourse. There's a lot of skepticism. One thing that's really crazy about this story that actually took me, like, by surprise and kind of caught me off guard a little bit is that, you know, when you look anything up on Google, like, as is, like, very kind of the beginning of, like, the process for us of, like, you know, researching or brushing up on any topic for an episode, like, one of the first things that comes up, of course, is Wikipedia. You know, Wikipedia is, despite, you know, not really being considered, like, a good source for, like, a school paper or something like that, a lot of people still look to Wikipedia as a good, like, impartial reference for basic knowledge of things. You know, in fact, like, if we've thought of something on the show, like on the fly, you know, something's come up on the fly in the show, a lot of the time we'll be going to Wikipedia to, like, familiarize ourselves with it or just get a vague sense of the terrain of what we're dealing with. If you look at the Wikipedia for this, literally, like, out the gate, it's like it was all a hoax. Like, you know, it was completely made up. Like, in a very,
the phrase they use, which came out of the grand jury, was a carefully crafted hoax.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, like, the Wikipedia article, which I think is entitled, like, Franklin pedophile ring allegations?
Franklin child prostitution ring allegations. So I'm looking at it right now, and maybe I'll just read the allegations for anybody that, like, has never heard of this before, which is, I think, surprisingly, like, a lot of people.
You would think that it would come up more, but maybe because, like, there's this sort of veil of doubt, like, around the whole thing. I mean, it is really murky, and a lot of it is, like, you know, for, like, reasons that are understandable in light of, like, some of the things that happened that we'll go through. Like, there, you know, the testimony, like, the evidence in some areas is kind of sparse. A lot of it is sort of, like, you know, rumor and innuendo, but there is, like, definitely you know, so, a fair amount of substance. Like, when it comes with circumstantial evidence comes together, there's a very spooky picture being painted. But I don't think it warrants what they
it definitely does not. And so just the way that, you know, this Wikipedia article, in a very loaded sense, describes, for anybody who's never heard of this before, in 1988, authorities looked into allegations that prominent citizens of Nebraska, as well as high-level U.S. politicians, were involved in a child prostitution ring. Alleged abusive victims were interviewed, who claimed that children in foster care who were flown to the East Coast of the United States to be sexually abused at, quote, bad parties. The claims primarily centered on Lawrence E. King Jr., or Larry King, not the CNN host.
No relation.
Just like this is a African-American Republican businessman,
he was
rising
actually
star.
Like a big, like, Democrats for McGovern guy, like black
I know,
Democrats
I
for
saw
McGovern.
that.
And then he pivoted to being, like, a huge, like, GOP dude who was, like, a Jack Kemp for president guy. So, you know,
very strange.
And was like a super active, like, you know, very enthusiastic black Republican, kind of like you know, someone who would do those like Candace Owens type things,
exactly.
where he would be like, why, you know, black people need to get off the demon rat plantation, you know.
Yes, exactly. He would be wearing a MAGA hat on Fox News.
Like, for sure. Yeah. Today he would be, like, literally, like, somehow involved in the, like, the vote, you know, lawsuits somehow, and making it about the Democrats are the real racists.
But anyway. You know, but just to finish here, you know, it said that the claims primarily center on Lawrence E. King Jr., who ran the now defunct Franklin Community Federal Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska, and alleged that the ring was, quote, a cult of devil worshippers involved in the mutilation, sacrifice, and cannibalism of numerous children. Numerous conspiracy theories evolved, claiming the alleged abuse was part of a widespread series of crimes, including devil worship, cannibalism, drug trafficking, and CIA arms dealing. And it just says here in one little brief paragraph about the investigations, the Nebraska State Foster Care Review Board submitted the results of a 2-year investigation into the alleged physical and sexual abuse of foster children to the executive board of the Nebraska legislature, who were investigating reports of child sexual abuse linked to the credit union. After investigation, a grand jury in Douglas County, where Omaha, Nebraska is situated, determined the abuse allegations were baseless, describing them as, quote, a carefully crafted hoax, and indicting 2 of the original accusers on perjury charges. These are teenagers, by the way. The grand jury suspected that the false stories originated
They were like
from
young, early 20s at the time.
Yeah, and the abuse allegations of it was that they were basically probably 14 to 16 at the time of this abuse. The grand jury suspected that the false stories originated from a fired employee of Boys Town. We'll get to that in a second. One of the largest Catholic orphanages in America, who might have, quote, fueled the fire of rumor and innuendo because of personal grudges. A federal grand jury also concluded that the abuse allegations were unfounded and indicted 21-year-old Alicia Owen, an alleged victim, on 8 counts of perjury. Owen served 4.5 years in prison and was sentenced to, I think, 23 years. Separately, the federal grand jury indicted multiple officers of the credit union for embezzlement of funds, including King.
Yeah, but he served less time than Alicia Owens, which is like crazy. Or Owen, yeah.
Yeah.
And he did like commit, like, you know, he was like summarily found guilty of like huge scale financial crime. You know, like something extremely shady was like definitively going on that he was found guilty of and went to jail for. And at the same time, people were like, oh yeah, and by the way, there's another aspect of this, which is that he's like, you know, involved in this, like, you know, child abuse ring. But like somehow, really, if you read like the jury reports, like a lot of it is like, oh, we're not qualified to deal with this. Like the federal government should handle it or whatever. You know, like they almost passed the buck on it. But in the process of doing that, they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, you're being indicted for perjury and you're going to jail for, like, you know, an absurd amount of time. She ended up getting out after, like, 4.5 years, but she was sent there for more.
And we're going to see this, like, again and again, like, the twisting of the story at, like, every single level and the really gargantuan effort by like most levels of government to like do whatever they can to put the kibosh on this led certain people in the government to suspect that there was some kind of cover-up going on, and the biggest forces in that were like a couple senators in the unicameral Nebraska legislature. The biggest were Senator Lauren Schmidt and Senator John DeCamp, who eventually became kind of like the face of this story and the main kind of advocate for, you know, I think in a lot of ways, in good ways, but also I think I finally read his book kind of cover to cover for the first time in preparation for this. I've been like aware of him. He's a main force in the Conspiracy of Silence documentary, which like I highly recommend anybody go watch because it gives you in like 1 hour a very good overview of the main players involved, and it gets some really kind of priceless like on-camera interviews with particularly I don't know, tell me if you disagree, but I found like kind of the most compelling witness was Troy Bonner, who was one of the victims and one of the kids who originally was deposed by the head investigator. So the Nebraska legislature, and I apologize for jumping around here, but there's many different angles to get it at them. They did start a like 2-year investigation, and they hired a retired police officer, a retired state trooper named Gary Caradori, who went out, hit the streets, and tried to substantiate some of these allegations. And substantiate he did, I would argue, in a lot of ways, and he found at least I think he interviewed on camera 4 of the victims. There were way more from I think earlier periods in the 80s when this originally started to blow up. I think there were like several dozen kids that originally had made allegations of abuse.
Yeah, there definitely are more who, you know, because that's the thing, like around all of this, like there's so much, like the thing about Troy Bonner is that he like retracted everything that he told to Gary Caradori, probably under, you know, like a lot of intimidation from the FBI, basically.
Yes.
I mean, I think that the witness or the victim who I find the most compelling is Alicia Owen, because she, and I think that's why she ended up going to jail, because she would not back down from what she believed, or what happened to her in the face of all that.
That's true, actually. She is the most consistent of all the people, and she got punished the hardest. Unless you believe that Troy Bonner, because he gave testimony, then he recanted.
After Gary Caradori's plane blew up under mysterious circumstances, killing him. And
sorry for the spoiler alert, but just as Gary
son.
Caradori was telling people that he finally had gotten hard proof, like photographic proof of some of these parties that King was holding, and that he finally had the bastards by the balls this time, and flew to Chicago with his 8-year-old son to interview certain witnesses and collect information. And also, John DeCamp says, investigate the Satan worshiper angle, which he was getting. He felt like he was getting some leads on when he was flying back in his single-engine Cessna, and it just, mysteriously disintegrated in the middle of the air, and he and his 8-year-old son died. And
if you read through either the two big books about this are John DeCamp's book, and John DeCamp, I think, he's a colorful personality. He loves William Colby.
William Colby, former CIA. We'll have to dive into inevitably his background. He is colorful is definitely one way to put it.
But there's another book by Nick Bryant, who's a bit less of an unreliable narrator, maybe. Although, and I think he kind of acknowledges some of the difficulties with some of the material and sort of knowing what happened in certain aspects. But he definitely is on the side that this was a real thing, and he believes the victims. But I think, but both of them do describe how much fear there was on the part of all the victims who did come forward, and both of them acknowledged there were people who just wouldn't because they were afraid. And Gary Caradori himself was intimidated. They're people just did not want this to get out, and people were threatened in many ways, their careers were threatened. John DeCamp is convinced that he himself was threatened, on many, both of the authors of these books actually feel that at various points
not just them, but just about everybody, including Senator Lauren Schmidt, got a phone call on the floor of the legislature one day that was Lauren, you're gonna he relates this in the documentary of Lauren, you better stop looking into this, and it is not going to be good for you. And he says, why not? And then he said, because this is going to go to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and you both know we're both good Republicans. And that was a kind of thing. And I think Carol Stitt, who is who worked at the foster care review board, who was one of the first people to kind of get alerted to some of these allegations of kids, and was a pretty fierce fighter of this legislative a supporter of this legislative inquiry. I think she got threatening phone calls too, and said you're not going to live to regret this if you keep going. And, lots of stuff. And, of course, Troy Bonner, he claims in his affidavit, which is published in DeCamp's book, that, basically the story he says is that he was, strong-armed by the FBI. I think he says in the documentary that they told him pretty memorable quote, it's not going to be believed. It will not be believed. Do you understand? And if you keep saying this, we're going to throw the book at you, and we're going to throw you in jail for a long time, and all this stuff, and bullied him into thinking he was totally fucked. And then actually put him up. This is also in the documentary. Kind of incredible they were able to get this tape, but it's a phone conversation the FBI recorded, and you can hear them. It's this is Special Agent Mott, recording Troy Bonner calling Alicia Owen, and the whole conversation is they put Troy Bonner up to basically try to entrap Alicia Owen into suggesting that they had done this for money.
Right,
and I just want to know,
I'm not going to lie anymore. And she's well, lie about what? And he's I don't know.
I don't know. And kind of says, I'm not going to jail for you, Alicia. I'm not going to jail for you. And kind of just, he doesn't hold it together very well.
She's well, what have you lied about? And he's I haven't lied, And it's well, then why are you scared of, lying, But, yeah.
It's very obviously, and that is something that's like fascinating about this case again and again. And I think we'll see there's like reasons why that like the FBI came down like a fucking ton of bricks on like anybody that wanted to talk about this. And of course, we have to mention who was running the executive branch of the government during all of this. And I mean, these allegations started to really come out in the middle of 1988, which was a very hotly contested election year where a certain George Herbert Walker Bush was, you know, fighting to succeed Ronnie Reagan and was still kind of trying to duck and weave from some of these Iran-Contra things that had been dogging him. They had mostly kind of gotten away with it. You know, I think as we put in our Contra 2 episode when he's like yelling at Dan Rather, like, these things have been meticulously researched and proven to be false. Dan, and I just think it's a little bit, if you'll pardon my language, it's a little bit disingenuous, you know, or something.
Yeah.
Fucking doing his little, like, kindly wasp routine.
There was, like, definitely an implication that, like, throughout they would encounter, like, the investigators would encounter the idea that this went up to, like, the highest levels and that if it got out, there would definitely be a threat to the Republican Party. I mean, King himself was described as being like the fastest rising African-American star in the Republican Party at the time.
Yes.
You know, and he would be like, my personal friend, you know, George Bush. Like, he was a really big booster of him. It's actually a good quote from Nick Bryan's book where he says, I know some of the people I admire aren't very popular.
Oh, yeah,
Ed Meese, the late Bill Casey of the CIA, and I love former Chief Justice Berger. These are the people I really like to talk to. Bill Casey, I thought so very highly of him, you know, so he would at least boast of his connections with these people. Yeah.
And I will say just tangentially that, like, that's not just that's not just fun trivia, because there's another book that will probably be maybe a sequel supplemental episode that's also co-written by Nick Bryant called Confessions of a DC Madam, which traces another arm of the octopus of this network in the 80s that was basically a DC callboy ring run by a guy named Henry Vinson, who was running it with a sort of White House operative / lobbyist / CIA operative named Craig Spence, who was kind of running this like sex ring operation with Larry King. Henry Vinson describes like many instances, and like when they were in Washington together, they would have Secret Service protection. This is under the Reagan White House, and Craig Spence was very close to Donald Gregg, who we mentioned in the October Surprise episode, who in another case where the feds tried to absolutely throw the book in a crazy perjury trial against Richard Brennicky, Donald Gregg like went there to like testify against him to get him thrown in prison. So you see a little pattern there of like the Bush Justice Department, which eventually was run by CIA agent Robert Johnson, aka William Barr, was got very activist about going and trying to slam anybody that alleged these kind of Iran-Contra adjacent conspiracies. But and that's important too, is that like there is this link to Washington in the Franklin scandal. It wasn't just in Omaha, but Larry King was flying kids from Omaha to Washington, D.C., where he owned a brownstone in Georgetown, and he would throw these lavish parties and invite lots of high-ranking kind of Republican and government people. And, just before, the reason I brought that up with Bill Casey is because in Henry Vinson's book, he alleges that Bill Casey was a regular client of the D.C. callboy ring that Craig Spence ran, and that at that point, William Casey, who was older at the time, could no longer maintain an erection, so but I guess he had a penchant for young men, probably like 18 to 22, and I guess he would just like to watch them like masturbate or whatever. So I think when Larry King says, Bill Casey, I just thought so very highly of him. That should tell you a lot about, like, because he was probably working for Bill Casey, to be perfectly honest. It at least that is, I think, in the final analysis, it seems like as John DeCamp says in this book, and I'm sure Nick Bryant argues as well, like there is no way for Larry King to kind of do what he was doing throughout the 80s and be such a high-flying star without having some kind of higher people backing what he was doing, because he was allegedly running this local credit union in North Omaha, which is a African-American part of the city, that, you know, his whole like outward brand, if you will, was, you know, he was investing in local black businesses, but he was, you know, it was like kind of a MAGA, like Trump's gonna like, you know, do urban investment program kind of thing, but we're gonna like do it with capitalism. And, you know, it should be mentioned, as seen in the documentary, he was invited to sing the Star Spangled Banner at the 1984 and the 1988 Republican National Convention. And John DeCamp actually notes that like the first time he saw Larry King was when he was selected as a delegate for, you know, the re-election of Reagan at the RNC in 84. And just so happened that Nebraska was put up at the very front of the stage, and so he was there down on the floor, and Larry King goes up, and I forget who it was who was with him, was like, hey man, that, like, look at that guy's from Nebraska, like he's a big deal. And, you know, he had never heard of him before, but then said, you know, he's throwing a big party later. And John Camp was like, I wanted to go, I thought I was just going to go see a movie. And he's like, if you're a good Republican, a good Nebraska Republican, you are going to be at this party. And he went there, and it was like so fucking lavish. I think this was in Dallas in 84. And he just threw Larry King, who... Okay, so he's supposedly running this credit union, which has on the books deposits of like, I don't know, like $2 million or something. So it's like a very, on paper, a very small credit union, but here he is throwing like a party that probably costs like hundreds of thousands of dollars to throw. He drives around in like chauffeured limousines. He wears like, he honestly, I mean, he kind of dresses like a pimp.
Yeah.
And
that's basically what he's described as being is like a pimp. Yeah.
Yeah, he like basically what in like the classic kind of like, you know, like players ball kind of like, you know, like he, I don't think he walked around with like a cane with like a diamond on top of it, but like he, you know, he wore like long fur coats and like 3-piece suits and had all these gold rings and like, you know, $10,000 watches, and was taking like, he's racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars on like chartered private jets, like flying around the country all the time. And so people did kind of wonder like, wow, this guy seems to be playing with a lot of money for somebody who took over like a small struggling North Omaha credit union.
Ladies and gentlemen, the chair now recognizes Lawrence King, Jr., a member of the Nebraska delegation, for the singing of the national anthem.
John DeCamp goes into kind of like, even I think his accounts were tied to a different bank, I think it was called First Tier Bank, which was like, I think the biggest bank in Nebraska at the time. And actually, like, he argues that like First Tier had to have known about it as well, because like the amount of deposits that were coming in and coming out were so suspicious. And but he was just living this like high flying lifestyle, and was able to own property in Washington, the heart of Washington D.C., and in Omaha, and had some of the biggest names of like the Reagan Bush crowd, and Pentagon officials, CIA people, diplomats, congressmen, all kinds of people at I mean, the party John DeCamp went to was like a kind of, but he was shocked at like how many like famous people he saw there. And I guess he said that Ronald Reagan's daughter was like hanging around Larry King all night, and they were like really, really close. So, I mean, Larry King was, I think it's safe to say, in John DeCamp's words, that he was the fastest rising black star in the Republican Party in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And,
right, yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I mean, of course, he was chosen to sing the national anthem. There's no like keynote address or anything, but definitely.
But he had quite the soaring baritone.
It's something. But yeah, so but it all started to kind of fall apart from him. I feel like maybe we should talk about just kind of the nature of the things that were being alleged. There's like, for me, there's kind of a break in the nature of the allegations between some of the earlier people to come forward, and then probably the most prominent, both in this story and also in like the world of like American conspiracies in general. But one thing that there's across the board in terms of the allegations about the involvement in child abuse rings and sort of satanic activities. That's something that's consistent between all of this stuff is these very, very extreme allegations. I think that maybe the Loretta Smith stuff is a good place to begin, even though she wasn't actually one of the quote unquote accusers.
She's somebody that doesn't get brought up very much, and it's kind of interesting.
She's mentioned in John DeCamp's book, but as we were saying before we started recording, she's not actually mentioned in Nick Bryant's book at all. I guess Loretta Smith, we think, might just be a pseudonym for someone, because this person would have been 15 at the time. And
I notice here that here on page 18 he puts an asterisk like next to her name, but
so it might be
it doesn't say at the bottom of the page like what the asterisk. He doesn't have like a footnote down here but I have a feeling that because Nick Bryant never brings her up, then I don't know, maybe he brings her up under a different name. He says Loretta Isabel Smith. But at the same time, I'm not sure. It's not a name that you hear pop up, but she actually gives some of the very first, in June 1988, Officer Carmine from the Omaha Police Department, who had been investigating this creepy photographer named Rusty Nelson, who was reported by,
he's a big
a
part
mother.
Of this.
He is. And
he's
he
a big
pops
link
up.
In this chain.
And he was actually the person that Gary Caradori was going to meet with, I think, in Chicago the weekend that when he flew back, he blew up. So, very
that's
suspicious
the concern
character.
Because, he's very suspicious. And actually, Nick Bryant meets with him, and he said that he had like a spooky and unctuous vibe. But he, did. What's interesting is that he said, so basically the speculation is that the reason why his plane blew up. I mean, who knows, how it blew up or what happened, but, and tragically his young son was also killed in the plane. But the idea is that because this guy was like, it seems that he was Larry King's photographer, basically. Yeah. So the idea, like in meeting with him, maybe he would have been able to obtain some pictures. So,
yes. And sometimes he claimed that he had his own stash of pictures, potentially as kind of blackmail insurance, so that Larry King couldn't do anything to him.
Yeah. Since we're starting with, since Rusty Nelson is kind of a way into this, maybe it would be good to read some of the stuff about him.
Yeah, I'm looking at the police reports right now.
Brian says that I talked to Nelson for 15 minutes, easing his reluctance before I plucked a tape recorder from my backpack. Over the course of the next 2 hours, he related an improbable tale of Larry King's nationwide network. He alleged the ring pandered or outright sold children to rich and powerful people, employed blackmail, and had ties to U.S., quote, intelligence. He maintained that King had attended satanic rituals and had routinely plundered Boys Town for underage prostitutes. Nelson also named eminent politicians as pedophiles. King hired me to take pictures of adults and children in compromising positions, Nelson told me. The pictures showed who the adults were and who the kids were. I gathered that the purpose was blackmail, and it was political. The contents of the pictures and the events surrounding them would be an instant end to a politician's career. Nelson claimed that King attempted to pressure him into making snuff films, causing their relationship to fissure. So I guess it's
that's a that's a corroboration of what we might hear later.
It's interesting that he was like, okay, I'll do child porn, but I guess snuff film, I don't know, it's a bridge too far. Anyway, so after Nelson severed his ties to King, he alleged he was harassed by the FBI. Nelson claims the crux of the FBI's threats wasn't designed to force disclosures about King's pedophile ring, but rather to silence him. That's definitely something that's consistent across a lot of these testimonies. Nelson's allegations were jarring, but his shifty personality really detracted from his credibility. After the interview, then he just talks about going to his friend Dirk's apartment. There's some more interesting stuff here, but just about how people were intimidated and the Conspiracy of Silence documentary and his attempt to get in touch with some of those people there. But anyway, so that's to this day, that's what he stands by. That he was taking sort of blackmail, child porn pictures for him. And then
and the cops got turned on to this guy because some woman kind of I don't know, I think she was maybe approached in a mall or something, and he said he was like a fashion photographer and he wanted to take photos of her daughter, and so they went there, but then he wanted it to kind of like they were kind of scantily clad and sus, and then she called up like his references that he gave, like different agencies that had used, and they're like, one of them was like, oh yeah, that guy, he's a pervert, like he's fucking sus. Mm-hmm. So then that woman called the cops, and then the cops started looking into him and kind of dropped its probe of him. But when they interviewed him, he talked about how he basically he was working out of an apartment owned by Larry King.
Basically, what they ended up saying was, Nelson would talk about his boss. Like he says in one of these, Officer Carmian, who was involved in the investigation, he reported that Parker stated, Brenda Parker indicated she suspected Nelson to be a homosexual. Parker identified Nelson as being a white male, approximately 25 years old, 9'5", 140 pounds, with dishwater blonde hair and a small blonde mustache. He was casually addressed and appeared quite effeminate. That's sick.
Effeminate.
During their also sick conversation, Parker stated that Nelson said he does work at Max, which is a gay bar located in downtown Omaha, and he further stated that he frequents gay bars. Parker stated that Nelson continually offered various foods and drink to both Parker and her mother. Nelson placed a very large bowl of strawberries on a table, offering them to Brenda and her mother. They were also offered to drink some champagne. During the conversation, Nelson stated that he was self-employed but made a couple references to, quote, the boss, keeping the place well-stocked, and that the boss let him stay there rent-free. It is unknown who the boss is. The officer sent to investigate his digs quickly established that the boss was Larry King.
Yeah. And this was in a apartment complex in like downtown Omaha, which has the very interesting name, the Twin Towers.
Yes, I noticed that.
Where a lot of these parties, Larry King basically spent like $50,000 tricking out the penthouse apartment in this place. So I think he let Rusty Nelson live in it for a while, and then he allegedly went to started throwing parties. Like at one point he bought a really expensive couch that wouldn't fit in the elevator, so he hired a crane for $1,200 to have the couch lifted into the apartment. Very elegantly furnished. They say he knows that King drives at least 5 different vehicles, 3 of them Mercedes-Benzes, 1 a Cadillac, and another sports car. They believe that he owns property in Washington, D.C. He went on to state that King has a habit of throwing names around and is believed he's very influential in the Republican Party.
But they ended up like completely like just throwing that out because they were saying like, oh, well, yeah, he owned the apartment this guy lived in, but he wasn't, working for him in any way or anything like that. That's like,
not easy to
the whole.
believe.
Yeah, this is what Chief Wadman, who later would be kind of implicated, he said, we had a situation where we were advised that there was a possibility of child pornography involving. No, it came in as a child pornography case. What happened is that there was a photographer who was taking photographs of young women, and in the course of that set of circumstances, the mother with her daughter called, that was Parker, who we'd mentioned, and filed a complaint with the police department, and the complaint involved a situation where her daughter was approached by the photographer to be photographed, and the photographer extended an invitation to this young woman's mother to come with her. They went to the studio, photographs were taken, and in the course of that, the mother became concerned over the photographs, and some of the photographs which she observed at the photo studio, and then filed a complaint of concern that this was a possible pornographic situation. We investigated it, found the photographer to be, legitimately involved in the photography business, legitimately involved in conducting the photographs, and getting signed releases and having a photography studio, and so on. The only involvement that this individual had subleased his studio or apartment from Larry King, and that was the extent of our investigation into pornography-related activities involving Mr. King in any way.
I wonder why that is Chief Wadman.
Yeah, and
we'll get to him. He's so full of shit.
In that it almost comes off that they weren't even saying that Nelson was involved in child pornography, but he definitely was. He's now a registered sex offender.
Yes, he's been in jail for it and everything. So I mean, and so they dropped their probe, of course, back in '88. But then, on June 28th, 1988, Officer Carmine was dispatched to interview a different girl whose terrible story pointed to the same clique. She was 15-year-old Loretta Smith, who lived with her mother and brother in Omaha. At the time Carmine talked to her, Loretta was hospitalized at Richard Young Hospital, where she had told a therapist, in the words of Carmine's report, about, quote, incidents in which she has been photographed nude or partially nude, as well as instances of devil worship. Carmine wrote that Loretta was, quote, rather articulate for a 15-year-old and spoke and acted rather maturely for her years. So here's an excerpt from the police report. Smith initiated the conversation by indicating that approximately 5 or 6 years ago, when she was 9 years old, she went to a party with some friends much older than her. There, she met a white male who coaxed her into modeling for him. He offered to take Smith home if Smith would pose for some pictures. Initially, the unidentified white male took photographs of her with a Polaroid camera of her fully clothed, although finally she agreed to pose for one completely nude photograph taken by this white male. Smith then spoke of occasions when she went to the North Omaha Girls Club on Lake Street with friends of hers whom she identified as Nellie and Kimberly Webb. There she discovered they were also, quote, modeling. Smith stated that those field trips consisted of the girls being taken to a photographic studio where pictures are taken of them either nude or partially clad. Smith also stated that she has not spoken to or knows the whereabouts of either Nellie or Kimberly Webb, not having seen them for approximately 3 years. She stated that a number of adults, whom she referred to as leaders from the North Omaha Girls Club, both male and female, were engaged in the photography of nude children. She also indicated that a number of prominent individuals were involved, including doctors and lawyers, although she indicated they used code names and that she could provide no real names for these individuals. Smith also indicated that the adult leaders who took these photographs used threats against her and others to get them to participate in these photographic sessions. She stated that she had been told on occasion that her entire family would be killed, as well as her, if she refused to participate in these activities. And she goes on to say...
she probably should have given like a content warning for like.
I know. I just thought about that.
Yeah,
I almost stopped myself. Let's just take a.
But it's gonna get worse. It's gonna get worse.
It's gonna get worse.
I
think we'll try not to read like the most horrific shit that try to do it in a way and definitely I think even some of these allegations, as extreme as they sound, I think in retrospect, just to say in a brief side note, I felt a little bad about, the excerpt we read of Kathy O'Brien a couple weeks ago, just because, like, I think the context of, like, laughing at that had more to do with our feud over it years ago. And I think kind of the ostentatiousness of that being, like, the first anecdote that you would find to support the theory of, like, Project Monarch is an admittedly very... it's a tough pill to swallow, because I think that's what happened, where I was look up Kathy O'Brien, and you found that passage, and we're like, really, dude? And I was just you have to believe her.
I think if people are, I'm not saying that didn't happen or anything, or or anything like that in terms of the Kathy O'Brien stuff. Like, again, who's to say? I think that, well, there's two elements of it, which I mean, well, definitely certainly a feature of me that is, in addition to having horrible vocal fry and saying liking all the time, which makes me maybe not the ideal person to have a podcast, is that as I'm doing right now, I have like a general habit of just like nervous laughter and like laughing when I speak, especially when talking about something that laughter can be like a response to something that's like in fact horrific. And I think another aspect of the Kathy O'Brien stuff is that there's like a very stark juxtaposition between the sort of horrific acts that are being carried out and the sort of public personae of these political figures.
Exactly.
So there's sort of like but that's not to if I have like a sort of almost involuntary of that type of thing when reading some of this material. It's almost like a reaction of discomfort more so than like laughing at a suggestion or the aspersions. Like, I think that's something, I mean, people like laugh at funerals, and in particular like that, there's sort of recipes for that.
For sure.
In some of this stuff.
So I think that's a good just like note to slide in there, as well as like a general content warning that like this is going to get this is a dark story, and I definitely believe a lot more of it than I don't. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of some of these allegations, even though they do get quite extreme. I think,
we're not, definitely like our general, position is that like there's definitely something like to this. Like, people can make their individual evaluation about like the reality of each particular thing that's alleged. I don't know, like if people have listened to that entire Q&A episode, where we talked about the story of involving George H.W. Bush and Cheney, and engage in acts that are kind of on a similar level to some of the other ones we'll talk about here. But
it's relevant because I think just to impress that we at least I personally I don't find in a very literal sense, I don't find those allegations about George H.W. Bush laughable on their face. And I think at the end of
saying even though people can look that up and make their evaluation for themselves, but I would certainly err on the side of saying that they're true rather than saying that they're false, because H.W. Bush is guilty of all sorts of horrible crimes. So
we already know that he's wearing a mask. He is a different type of person underneath than the image he presented to the public. And I think by the end of this episode, I think maybe people will have a little more evidence to go off of why we're so we so repeatedly evoke George H.W. Bush as the hidden shaitan of the late 20th century American politics.
And another relevant sort of one to this is that sort of has that same kind of juxtaposition to it is the Hunter S. Thompson, eating a baby. But that's also kind of a straw man in sort of our shorthand of talking about it, when really the accusation was that he filmed the eating of a baby. That was, again, sort of mired in a bunch of other stuff. Rusty Nelson does kind of stand by. It's interesting because, it's unclear whether that was a pseudonym given, but Rusty Nelson, for what it's worth, does, in Nick Bryant's book, indicate that actually Hunter S. Thompson was into doing snuff films, but we'll get to that down the line. But
it does come up into Camp's book as well, because that was originally brought up by Paul Benassi in his allegations. But I think
a lot of the stuff is so sorry, just to continue to talk as we talk about the Loretta stuff, it's gonna get, as we continue to read this, it's gonna get pretty bad, and there's it's almost surreal, and it's a characteristic that a lot of this stuff has, where because this is really part of that larger cultural wave where we're talking about people describing, and again, this is all very horrible and very grim, and we're doing this podcast week to week, and we're dealing with these in a way we've become desensitized to it, And if we like sometimes like chuckle or something like that, it's like, something that helps us to stay sane, because like this is like the darkest like part of humanity, but there's this sort of surreal aspect to it where, like when children would say like, oh, Ronald McDonald did this, or I saw a giraffe like being killed, or say like a mutilated giraffe. Like there is this kind of like circus like kind of like surreal aspect to it that's almost like we talked about this before, like the sort of clownishness or the mockery is kind of built into it. But I don't know if this is just kind of like talking off the cuff, but I think that is something that happens when there's like something just so shocking. Sometimes like a sudden decapitation or whatever.
Sure.
Like that's like seen in Hereditary, a great movie where like well, I won't give it away, but like if something horrible happens shockingly,
that is a very
they'll know what I
scene.
mean. Yeah. But a lot of people will involuntarily let out, kind of a chuckle when they encounter something
kind of shocked laughter
horrifying.
And things like
exactly,
that.
like
So I think in a way, it kind of, I think it gets to a thing that I think we are trying to do here, which is like sort of resist the urge to like the, I don't know, you could almost call it like the laughter of exit from being able to take these things like seriously and like hold them in your brain and not have them be so epistemologically threatening to like your worldview that you kind of have to laugh at it, or in some sense like not take it seriously, or on the other hand get so kind of black-pilled and overwhelmed by like the evil of this that you're just like it almost paralyzes you in a way, which I feel like sometimes the satanic panic stuff, it's like it would have that kind of binary reaction, maybe like more religious or evangelical people or people that cared more about the welfare of children really deeply were almost kind of just like shocked into almost their own kind of like dissociative state, broadly defined, of like not even being able to critically, not even wanting to be able to stomach like to critically engage with like politics anymore, because this is so gross. And like I definitely went through probably periods of that when I was like digging into Franklin like over the years. There's definitely a period where it's like it was the furthest thing, even like nervous laughter about it was kind of like it was really disturbing to consider that these things were real and there was like evidence backing it up, but that the media was just like never going to. It was a successful cover up, like of a really nasty conspiracy. But I think as we read a little deeper into like what these allegations were, maybe that's just the posture
definitely
we'll try to inhabit
and definitely we're not like trying to like because I think that a point that you're making is that like in the Wikipedia article there's certainly like some people who would like laugh off the idea of this stuff, which is like certainly not like our position at all. We're not like saying that this is like to be ridiculed or is ridiculous and should like not be taken seriously or like believed or something like that, or like the way people like mock like alien abductees or something like that, and being like
this is a bit different category because we sort of know that it is like it is there's a realness to it of this is just human behavior. This doesn't involve any ALMAOs or UFOs or even the satanic stuff, which we'll get to, is definitely in that liminal strange world that we've talked about with Aquino and other people that have engaged in black magic, where it's not like people aren't necessarily saying that, oh, I saw people like fly and like shoot electricity. It's like these are like rituals for power and like sacrificing people.
Or even if someone like has like these experiences, like I think that it's important to like take them seriously, and like the whole idea that like this is like insanity or stupidity of some kind, like that's not like like something that like we're interested in passing judgment on as people as being like insane or stupid, like really, I think
and
in any respect,
and the like every aspect of the U.S. government, the judicial system, has already seen to it that everyone would see this as ridiculous and not take it seriously. So I think we're pushing back on that a little bit.
So content warning for something that might be like disturbing, if like this is the kind of material that disturbs you, and also content warning, for something that is, very much in that kind of vein of being extreme, kind of on the outlandish side as these things go.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Lauren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to. They said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and we're both good Republicans."
The night before we testified before the legislative committee, I did receive a phone call at home that said, "If you speak, you won't live to regret it."
With that, I think I'll get to the heavier stuff here that Loretta Smith told Officer Carmine. She said that, quote, she began participating in what she termed devil worship with other juveniles and adults. She stated that she was approximately 12 or 11 years old when she started attending these rituals, which sometimes included nude photography. Those participating, quote, were given something to drink, which she stated tasted like apple juice, which she thought contained some kind of drug. Smith indicated that Nellie and Kimberly Webb had also reported these activities to police in the past and that nothing had been done. She stated that the Webb girls had told the superintendent of Fort Calhoun schools, whom she identified as a Mr. Finch, and stated that it had been reported to him first, but girls felt since nothing was done that he must have been involved also. In a report dated June 30th, 1988, Carmine put down more of what he had learned from Loretta. Quote, during the course of reporting officers' interview with Loretta Isabel Smith concerning child pornography activity as well as devil worship, she mentioned the name of Larry King as being a participant and supporter of these activities. Asked how she knew this, Smith stated that she is a friend of the daughter of Gary West. West is reportedly the manager for Max's, a predominantly homosexual bar located south of Central Station at 1415 Jackson Street. Smith stated that she has been to the West residence several times and that Gary West is a homosexual as well as an alcoholic. She stated that when he does become intoxicated, he talks about his certain activities with Larry King and indicated that he is into the use of controlled substances, i.e. cocaine, for personal use as well as for sale, and that he owes Larry King a lot of money for this. With regard to Larry King, she stated that she knows that he supports devil worship activities. She further indicated that King owns a house on Wirt Street, the exact location of which she did not know, but that King holds various sex and drug parties there.
Yeah, it gets, in her testimony in 1988, while she was saying this, it's important to note she was in like a psychiatric hospital.
Yes.
And this is actually a report for the legislature's Franklin Committee by Jerry Lowe. And it talks about, what she said to hospital staff in 1988. And this is something that is intense.
Yeah.
Okay, so August 19th, 1988. The hospital notes indicated that Loretta was asked to give a chronological account of involvement in what is described as a devil worship cult, and that Loretta agreed to do this. Loretta indicated that she didn't really know what was happening and that she became involved very gradually. And this is something that is sort of corroborated. The process she describes of getting involved, I think, as we'll see, we'll probably juxtapose this or compare it with some of what the other more prominent victims said.
Yeah.
And you'll see how this kind of lines up. She indicated that when she was approximately 9 years old, she was going to the girls' club in Omaha and that a guy named Ray would take her and 4 or 5 other girls at the girls' club on outings. He took them to a building that, according to Loretta, looked abandoned and asked the girls if they wanted to go in, which they all agreed to do. Loretta indicated they sat and talked for a while, and then Ray provided a joint, and all the individuals got high. She indicated this activity continued for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then Ray took them to a party. Loretta indicated that at the party, there were about 10 men, all in their mid-30s, and that initially they sat around and talked with the girls about their problems. Loretta indicated that all the people got wasted and that the men at the party made them sleep around, and that the girls did not have a choice of who they slept with. So, this begins to really escalate. So, then in order to get out of the house, she did begin going to the parties again, and they lasted for another 6 months. So she stayed away for a few days. Then she started to go again. In one occasion, she threatened to tell her mother that the men were having sex with her, and that they knew she was only 9, but the men indicated that they would kill anyone who told about the activities. the men started taking the girls to what the men described as power meetings. So I feel like this is an important thing.
Yeah.
Loretta advised she was 10 years old. She indicated that candles and other weird stuff were at the power meetings. According to Loretta, one of the individuals on one occasion told the girls the room was going to spin for a while, and it did, and she realized later that it was drugs the men had given them. Loretta advised that about 10 months later, she was put through her first test. This is horrible. Okay. Her and the other girls were taken to a building in Omaha where she was locked in a room with a little girl, which she described as a Caucasian infant. At about midnight, Loretta indicated the men came into the room, took the little girl away from her, and told her that she could achieve power by killing something that she really loved. Loretta described that they then cut the little girl's head off, stuck it on the wall, and made her sit in front of it. Loretta indicated later that she had to take the head off the wall and that the men held her down when they cut the eyes out of the little girl's head. Then they left Loretta and the girl in the room, locking the door. She was left in the locked room with the little girl for 24 hours, and during this time, she could hear one of the other girls screaming. Shortly after this, the men came into the room and told Loretta she had passed the test and drove her a couple blocks from her house and let her out. So, yeah, and it goes on to say that, she, like, there was a child that was fried and eaten by girls, you know, as part of another test. And yes, there was some consumption of children and things like that.
They said at additional meetings, Loretta indicated the men told her and the other girls that they must sacrifice for power and described 3 incidents where further sacrifices took place.
Yes, and she says, she makes a point that the clothes they were wearing had upside-down crosses on them, and the leader always wore a long black cape with gold rings shaped like a skeleton head. Yes.
Just a cool symbol.
Yeah, obviously he believed in unknownism. Anyway.
So, like, that, I mean... that's even worse than kind of the Aquino stuff, I think, in a way. I mean, the Aquino, they weren't... The one thing that is interesting about this from like a satanic panic perspective is that unlike a lot of things like McMartin or the Presidio scandal or the West Point scandal and other things like that, is that most of the kids who were alleging abuse in this case were like teenagers. So in a way, it's much more like Den or Epstein in that these were not like tiny, tiny children. So when they're giving their testimony, these are like 15, 16, sometimes it's a few years later, like 19, 20-year-olds. And they're generally able to articulate a much more clear narrative. And it's interesting how similar it is in a lot of ways to the very little kids that testified in, you know, a lot of those other trials and how they were totally discredited because it's like, oh, it's probably just their imagination or whatever. But I don't like how
a lot of
the type of stuff that
like
Loretta Smith is saying.
Yeah, animals being mutilated, something, you know, that comes, so a lot
drinking
of
blood, like even the idea that was explored on the Geraldo special, which did have some Franklin scandal adjacent people on it, but did not go into the Franklin scandal, which is kind of interesting. Maybe actually, no, that special was in like 88, so it hadn't really like broken out in a big way yet. But the guy that said that, you know, he committed murder, a ritual murder to get 10,000 souls in hell, even that totally lines up with like these people ordering these kids that they have to kill for power. They have to sacrifice something that you love, like to get power from the devil and stuff. Yes. So even the kind of cult activities, there is a consistency.
Yeah, we've talked about, and this is again like a very like old idea that like, you can take life to gain power. Like again, this is like what we talked about this again like in the Q&A episode, where the whole idea of adrenochrome, which, you know, it's interesting, the Hunter Thompson connection to some of the stuff, because like
it
you
really
know
is,
whether you believe it actually was
like,
Hunter Thompson.
Where did this meme come? Like, did he hear about this from somewhere? I mean, what was it inspired by?
Whether you actually believe that it was Hunter Thompson, it is interesting that, you know, that person would, you know, they were apparently, according to Paul Bonacci, but we'll talk about Paul Bonacci later, because but anyway, like, he, you know, he was picked up in Las Vegas, I don't know, but yeah, like,
and you know, Hunter Thompson also, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but he literally lived next door in Aspen, Colorado to Bandar Bush.
Well,
Bandar Bush moved. They shared a property line.
But basically, yeah, this idea of sacrifices to gain power, is kind of what the adrenochrome thing is like, almost like a rationalization of, as we were kind of proposing. And I think
when it seems like this is really about it's about killing somebody that you love. Like it's about kind of a psychological transformation, perhaps. Yeah. And maybe doing it in a group ritualized setting, and
another
this is,
interesting thing that about the Loretta Smith account is that, as you often say, as you often point out with reference to the sort of stories by younger kids, she was, at least in retrospect, able to realize that she had been drugged.
Exactly. So she didn't say. She said the room started to spin, but she was old enough to say that they weren't doing magic on her.
Later on, she was able to realize that, and who, that could have also affected the nature of some of her other, the rest of what she experienced in some way. I am not to say that some of that stuff maybe didn't happen literally as she described it, but.
It is interesting to kind of consider as a possibility that just how we talked in the Aquino episode about how if you took a bunch of hypothetically, if you took a bunch of 3 or 4 year olds and gave them LSD and then did stage magic in front of them, that I'd say there's a decently high chance that they would believe that they had just seen magic.
If you gave a 9-year-old a bowl of peeled grapes, gave them LSD, and told them that it was eyeballs, they would believe it. If you if you did some weird stunt,
if you took a realistic doll or something.
Yeah, then, not to say that what she described, necessarily, it's possible that did happen, but in terms of
totally.
Frying people, eating them, drink, what she was told versus what was real. But again, what's really the difference, practically speaking, between
that's
those
extreme
things?
Even if you were doing it's almost as bad because you're psychologically you're traumatizing this person and terrifying them, and so the first reaction to that, it bears mentioning, this is when Foster Care Review Board Executive Director Carol Stitt received the reports from Loretta's caseworkers. She believed that the girl's testimony appeared highly credible, and Stitt explained before the state legislature's executive board in December 19, 1988, quote, "One of the things that you want to keep in mind, as horrifying as this is when you review it, this girl is very concrete about who was present at these homicides, what was happening, dates. She gave a lot of specific information, and in working with children, one of the ways you know that this is not a global fantasy is the more details they give you." And DeCamp says the information given to hospital staff and to the Omaha police by Loretta Smith overlapped and corroborated what was already in the hands of authorities from the children from the Webb household and from Margot Georgiou and her daughter. That's the mother that went to Rusty Nelson. And from those 3 separate cases involving pornography, child abuse, and ritual murder, the children's testimony and other evidence started to converge on Larry King.
Yeah,
and it was around.
I think that there actually might have been some false memory foundation involvement in the stuff later on.
That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Bryant pointed this out, and that's another thing about the false memories. A lot of the time, the whole thing with the confabulated false memories is in Todd Rivers' case, I guess, who was a litigant. The Boys Town Report published an absolute falsehood concerning Todd Rivers, who was one of the litigants. The report said that Rivers had claimed recovered memories of his molestation by Boys Town's father, James Kelly, in March of 2002, and he gave an interview to the World Herald about his molestations before February 23rd, 2002. Therefore, he wasn't being truthful, but Todd Rivers actually commented on his abuse in a World Herald article from February 23rd, 2003, almost a year after he recovered memories of being molested. The fact that Boys Town published an outright falsehood to deconstruct Rivers' credibility is very disturbing. So that's another thing, this magazine, the World Herald.
The Omaha World Herald is so...
Yeah, they were 100% on board with suppressing this, and they just smeared them, and were...
Basically, it appears that the reason that was is because literally, like many of the people that owned and ran the Omaha World Herald were literally the people that were being accused by these kids as being part of this abuse ring, including Harold Anderson, who I think was like one of the owners of it, and then Peter Citron, who is like the celebrity columnist. They basically played like an incredibly malicious role in stomping all over this case and the inquiries around it from the very beginning. And Omaha, the way it's described is like that, like these Midwestern states that don't have huge populations, but maybe have, certain industries and stuff, like the sort of local bourgeoisie kind of really does run everything according to their own, wants and needs. Like you see such an overlap of like the prominent Omaha citizens that keep getting accused and all these things. It's like, they're all in tight with like the police chief, and they are on the board of Boys Town, and they're on the board of the Omaha World Herald, and the FBI agent is the FBI chief of Omaha is best friends with the police chief who's being accused. And
I remember reading something that was like, like it's we're should presume like innocent until like, prove, but like they're like, well, they're not technically defendants in anything yet, so like we don't have to take their side. Like they like did some kind of thing where it's like to justify like how ridiculous they were being in just really trying to smear these people like right away. Like they were just like, we need to destroy anyone who came forward with this. But this is not even the World Herald per se. Like the Boys Town, the report commissioned by Boys Town to investigate the abuse allegations actually had to distort what the already very biased World Herald reported to make this attack on him. And Bryant goes on just to tie this into the false memory thing. The fact that Boytown published an outright falsehood to deconstruct Rivers' credibility is very disturbing. It's also disturbing the Boys Town report cleared Father James Kelly of molesting Boys Town youth, because I've talked to 4 former students who claim Kelly was their abuser, and his history suggests that of a serial predator. In Todd Rivers' case, Boys Town conscripted a psychiatrist who sat on the advisory board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation to debunk Rivers' repressed memories. FMSF has a macabre genius, and some of its advisory board members have a prior affiliation with CIA mind control experimentation.
That's true.
But another thing is that, I guess in this case he did sort of recover memories, but a lot of the time, when people are accused of having these made up confabulated memories, they don't even have a period where they don't remember them. They just remember them all the way through, from when they happen to when they're telling about them. And then to say that is just a false memory that you've confabulated, it's just not even, it's totally getting away from even what the whole idea of this false memory thing was supposed to be.
Wait, so break that down again, the distinction between that. So it's not a memory they totally forgot.
I feel like the idea was introduced by the idea that through therapy or through hypnosis or something like that, you would come to remember something that had happened that you had forgotten or repressed. And then in that suggestible state of hypnosis or through the leading of a therapist or something like that, then you could remember things that hadn't actually happened. So that's the idea of false memory, and you could pick that apart on its own, but then somehow that idea, which seems a little bit more acceptable, has been used to insinuate the idea that memories that, people just straight up remember are false too.
Okay. So not something recovered via hypnosis.
Yeah. In this case, in Todd Rivers' case, he did remember them. He had forgotten them. They were repressed. But a lot of the time, there's no recovery that even happens, or is necessary. People would just be on this day, this happened, and I've never forgotten it, and in fact, it's burned into my memory, and they'll be oh, that's a false memory, which is they've departed from the whole narrative they use, the whole sort of more acceptable narrative they use to get the idea of false memories accepted.
Unscrupulous psychiatrists and social workers were implanting these things. Now it's just if you remember it, it could still be false. I have to say, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is one of the sussest and most evil, I think, groups.
No,
that
what are you talking about? What about Lucian Greaves? You know,
Oh,
he
yeah,
believes
yeah.
in free rights, and you know, have you read the Satanic Principles?
The head of it is true that the head of
yeah.
the Satanic Temple, I think, when he was at Harvard, did work for the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. He just seems so passionate about, you know, debunking these religious false memories about satanic abuse. And
Yeah, what an important cause to dedicate your life to, making sure
Yeah.
you know that
And-
like
and
yeah,
you know, it is worth
anyway.
noting, not only did the people in that have you know, CIA like MK Ultra kind of ties, but the foundation itself was originally created by Pamela and Peter Freyd, whose daughter, who's actually now I think a psychology professor at the University of Oregon, who like specializes in like childhood abuse and things like that. She actually accused her father of sexual abuse, and as a result, he and his wife, like, I guess, you know, claimed that she was wrong and that a therapist had brainwashed her. And so then they founded the FMSF. And
wow.
yeah, like, so they founded it. And
I've heard that story many times where basically, yeah, it's like just like abusers who will just be like, oh, you know, yeah, no, not true, like false memory. It's just
yeah,
like
and they were
go-to.
brought in as experts, like starting in and this all happened in 1990. So in a way, like this kind of like turned the tide and sort of the war over like the satanic panic, I think, in the culture in like 1990, 91. In the early 90s, like they started like generously offering their services to testify as experts in various abuse trials, and basically we're always on the side of like, it's a fake memory, abuse didn't happen. It's like 100% of the time. And you know, eventually people, you know, a lot of like I said, like big shots in the scientific world kind of joined their board. They claimed to have 2,000 members in 1993. One interesting guy with the I don't know, very novelistic name Ralph Underwager, was a member of the Foundation's Scientific Advisory Board in 1993. When his comments from a 1991 article in Paidika, the Journal of Pedophilia, came to public awareness. The article contained statements which were interpreted as supportive of pedophilia. In the controversy that followed, Underwager resigned from the FMSF Scientific Advisory Board. Underwager later stated that the quotations in the Paidika article were taken out of context, used to discredit his ability to testify in courts, and through guilt by association, damage the reputation of the FMSF. So yeah, he wrote something, I forget. Oh, okay, yeah, and this is a little thing. In the Sunday Times in London, child abuse expert says pedophilia, quote, part of God's will. So he just misinterpreted. He was misinterpreted. Okay. So yeah, these people were like kind of like scum of the earth and definitely did the devil's work. And even Carl Sagan cited material from the 1995 issue of the FMS newsletter in his critique of the recovered memory claims of UFO abductees and those purporting to be victims of satanic ritual abuse in his book, The Demon Haunted World, Science is a Candle in the Dark. Ooh, Carl Sagan.
Yeah, I was going to say, like,
thumbs down.
I was going to say that, like, you know, he's often held up as being, like, you know, loving science. But actually, I saw him referenced as Carl Sagan with a K in that book that we were reading for, I think, the Alwara, the last Alwara, on Soviet parapsychology in one of those books. And he was, like, sort of someone who was, like, floating ancient aliens or something. Maybe we should do an episode on like how sus Carl Sagan is, because I feel he like really flies under the radar and is someone who like people just like worship and like get all their
daddy to so
from.
many people.
Because I mean, he smokes weed, he believes in science, like what more could you want?
He wears cool sweaters. Yeah, exactly.
He's from
just
the 70s.
Mr. Smart Guy. I mean, I used
like
to.
He believes in science, but he makes it like kind of mystical, you know. So
he
like,
does. I guess so.
Anyway,
and you know, Neil deGrasse is like carrying on his legacy.
He tells a story.
Let me tell you a story about
a
dodecahedron. That's something like that. Very proto TED Talky.
You did a very.
I was just doing Idris Shah again.
The FBI's attitude was, just no, that these kind of things don't happen. From the first interview when I went, and realized they don't believe a fucking thing I'm saying, they were just appalled. But I realized what that look in their eye was back then. It was fear. It was fear of every, I had witnessed, firsthand things that would, destroy this city, people, or a position, what I mean? It's not going to be believed, they said. It will not be believed. You will be found guilty of perjury, and they weren't telling me maybe. They were saying, there's no way. You go on with this story, you're going to jail. That was said to me direct. Just out of fear, I came to recant the story out of fear.
I've heard that people said that Gary Caradori coached me and that he told me what to say, but the fact was I didn't meet Gary Caradori until way after I'd already talked to the Omaha police about the abuse and had named all the same people. And they didn't ask me very much about Larry King or even Alan Bear at all. They treated the allegations that I made about the people who abused me almost like a joke.
So,
right,
yeah,
but anyway,
okay,
this false memory stuff, and this, I even saw, on Wikipedia, one of the, of course, I looked at, what the sources were for, all this stuff, where they're it was the biggest hoax of all time, or whatever, and one of them was, some book called, The Changing Views of the Child Molester in American Society, at least that was the subtitle, it just kind of sandwiched all this stuff in between a bunch of stuff about, McMartin and false memories. So it's interesting how this, which is really so enmeshed in all this different stuff, say what you will about McMartin, but it was really down the line there was just this maybe some people allege there was some kind of ring involved, but there's so many tentacles to all of this, where there's very well documented and prosecuted financial crime and embezzlement, fraud, and there's all these links to smuggling and things like that, and to the larger the Iran-Contra sort of picture to the Bush administration, in sort of a setup similar to the one we described in previous Contra episodes in Mina and another Midwestern city, and yet somehow everything about this can be written off through the sort of the false memories, it's satanic panic, where that's an aspect of it, but there's also much more even to it,
So this thing, do we want to get to the core of the main kids?
Yeah,
we read this stuff about Loretta
Smith.
Smith.
To Alicia Owen and talk about what she described. It is sort of a different character. It's not, at least in John DeCamp's book, what she sort of describes. She definitely does describe an occult and satanic element. It's not as extreme, and I don't know if she alleges, at least in this testimony that was, that she gave to Gary Caradori. I'm not sure if she straight up says anything about murder, but this is what she says. She's talking about Troy Bonner. So, actually, it might be better to start here. Sorry. So after pursuing many leads on October 30th, 1989, this writer contacted Alicia Owens at the Women's Reformatory in York, Nebraska. So she was in jail at the time for credit fraud.
Bad check.
Or something.
Passing a bad check.
Bad check, yeah, right. So I spoke with Alicia for approximately, and that was used to discredit her, of course. It's she's a felon,
scumbag. Yeah, they definitely. There's a lot of slut shaming. A lot
of not
she's
relevant.
A bad kid.
If she passed a bad check. Again, we'll get to Paul Bonacci. That I'm a little bit okay. But anyway, so I spoke with Alicia for approximately 3 hours, during which time she indicated she had been heavily involved in pornographic and sexual activity with various individuals in Omaha, including former personnel of the Franklin Credit Union. During this discussion with Miss Owen, she initially indicated that homosexual activities also occurred involving Alan Bear, Harold Anderson, and Robert Wadman, who we mentioned before, the police chief. Who was nothing to it. So it should be noted that Miss Owens remitted this information without being directly questioned about these specific individuals, following as the information gained from Alicia during the videotape statement. During the course of the statement, Alicia stated that she first became involved with Larry King in August of 1983. Alicia was 14 years old at the time. She indicated that she met Larry King through some boys from Boys Town, among them Mark Powers, which is asterisk, so that might also be a pseudonym. Mark had invited her to a party that next Friday night. This first party, again, this is exactly very similar to what Loretta described. This first party was held in August of 1983 at a Twin Towers penthouse. Alicia arrived with Troy Boner and Mark Powers at approximately 10 p.m. in a car that Troy was driving. Present when they arrived at the party were Larry King, Bob Wadman, Alan Baer, Harold Anderson, and other adults that Alicia did not identify at this time. Alicia estimated there were approximately 6 adults and 20 minors. Mark Powers had told Alicia prior to going to the party that there would be marijuana, alcohol, and so much cocaine available at this party that she would think it's snowing. Alicia stated that the party was held at Alfie Allen's apartment in this building. There was a, quote, professionally made pornographic tape portraying 2 males, approximately age 17, engaging in homosexual acts. Alicia observed Larry King and Larry, last name unknown, black youth, going into one of the bedrooms. She observed later, when the black youth emerged from the bedroom, that he was tucking in his shirt and fastening his pants. Alicia also observed Alfie Allen going in and out of the bedroom numerous times. She observed a young boy, approximately 14 years old, sitting on Harold Anderson's lap. She then observed this boy and Harold Anderson going into one of the bedrooms. Alicia observed Alan Baer using 2 lines of cocaine and smoking marijuana. A young boy was sitting on Harold Anderson's lap with his pants undone. He was stroking the child's penis. The name of the child is unknown. She goes on with this sort of vein. There's lots of things about Robert Wadman. She was made to have sex with him. Basically he raped her, like he forced her to have sex with him in a pretty violent way. It says that, she was afraid that he would rape her, so, she, let him kind of masturbate on her. Then she recoiled, which made him very angry. During all these parties, there were lots of, these things. Anyway, so she described Rusty Nelson as someone who was present, taking photographs there. She said that Alan Baer cruised the market looking for people to, pick up for these type of things. Wadman told her that Larry King owes him a lot and that he had done a lot for Larry King. She was told that the Omaha mayor, P.J. Morgan, had a lot of supplies a lot of drugs. She also writes that says that she took numerous plane trips in the direction of Larry King for sexual purposes. This is an important thing where they went to Los Angeles, Kansas City, Pasadena, California. On these flights were other minors. This is a big sticking point of a lot of these things that they went on flights, particularly to California.
And Las Vegas, where there was some kind of they almost equated it buying and selling.
Yeah, they would often
auctions.
even stop on the way, Las Vegas, which is nearby. They would go to Las Vegas or travel on the way there, to go there, come back.
Yes.
But anyway, then she says further, and according to Gary Caradori, there wasn't any leading that happened here. This is what she volunteered. She mentioned a house on Leavenworth where there is or was a pentagram drawn on the kitchen floor. She also saw satanic pictures on the wall of this house. In addition, she stated that she saw Bob Wadman coming out of this house on one occasion. And this is corroborated by Loretta Smith, as is noted by, Gary Caradori. She also indicated that she knows an individual identified as James Teddy Broom. She describes him as black with greasy hair, a flat nose, slitted eyes, and that he walks funny. She said he does dirty work for Larry, last name unknown. Loretta actually said something similar about Teddy Broom being instrumental in satanic cult activity and that he threatened her. So this is corroborated by a lot of the stuff that, Loretta said, even though she doesn't describe, at least to Caradori, any murder activity, but definitely there was satanic activity.
And just for the record, Loretta Smith and Alicia Owen did not know each other, right?
No, they did not know each other. She did know Troy Bonner,
yes,
and she did know from these events and these parties first, according to them. And she knew another prominent victim, which was no relation also named King. I think
Danny King. Danny
yeah,
King. Yeah,
but he's not related to Larry King.
Exactly.
But yeah, so they knew each other. But yeah, Loretta was totally different. Like they were not in contact.
So it is interesting. That would seem to pretty heavily undercut the feasibility of concocting a carefully crafted hoax if somebody who made these allegations in 1988 absolutely like had no social relationship with this other cluster of kids who made allegations about the exact same people that were substantially very similar in 1989 and 1990.
Yes,
right?
Same names, and they were very similar.
Yeah, and some of those names, I guess, like we mentioned a few of them before, but there was like Alan Baer, who was a department store tycoon in Omaha and very influential businessman. There's obviously Chief Wadman, the chief of police. Harold Anderson, who was one of the owners of, or sat on the board of the Omaha World Herald, Peter Citron, the columnist at the Omaha World Herald, and you know, Larry King, like, yeah, he was pretty openly friends with all of the wealthiest, most powerful business people in Omaha, often referred to as, well, they actually have a group, a very sus-sounding group called the Knights of Aksar Ben, which is Nebraska backwards with like some hyphens put into it to make it sound, I don't know, more Egyptian or Babylonian. And it's kind of like a, I don't know, like a para-Masonic fraternal high society sort of group that, you know, does a lot of charity work, but like all of the most powerful business people in Nebraska are Knights of Aksar Ben, and they do a kind of strange ritual every year where they like coronate one of their members as
they
a
were
king, they select
were influenced by Mardi Gras, right? I think I remember reading something about this at the, you know, because of course in New Orleans they have like all sorts of crazy like Mardi Gras organizations and like weird like rituals around like all that stuff, like the coronations and things. Yeah, they have kind of their own sort of weird fraternal equivalent. Aksar Ben, right?
They would do a strange thing where they would take a king, which would be like one of the men, you know, one of the Knights of Aksar Ben, and then like the queen would be selected, and it would usually be like a daughter of like one of the prominent members. And you know, I mean, this is like a ceremony, but it's like a creepy kind of debutante ball kind of thing of like, you know, even just symbolically of, you know, the king and the queen, and there's obvious, it's kind of a like giving your daughter to like the king of the Knights of Aksar Ben. Even just symbolically, it's kind of interesting.
Right.
And it just bears mentioning like a little bit. I want to make sure to not like blow over this, but one of the I think somebody who I don't know if he's a Knight of Aksar Ben, but he is one of the wealthiest people in Omaha, Nebraska. This is, of course, Warren Buffett, the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. And he's always struck me as like a little bit, more than a little bit sus. Just this goofy old man licking ice cream cones, like living in Omaha, who's like, I think was, you know, one of the richest men in the world, and was just like, oh, he's so smart, and like the Oracle of Omaha and all these things. But what's interesting is that John DeCamp reports that one of King's earliest boosters in Omaha was Warren Buffett's wife. And I guess they became social friends, like the Buffetts and the Kings, and were close enough that Warren Buffett's wife, who I guess was a popular socialite, threw like a 10-year like wedding anniversary event at their home for Larry King and his wife. And later on, Warren Buffett like kind of would always try to distance himself from, I think he tried to deny later on that like, I don't think that party ever happened. And then there was a story that was like, oh, his wife wanted to do it, but then Warren Buffett like shut it down and like didn't want, like, so it's like, oh, just his wife was friends with him, not Warren Buffett. But I don't know, like Warren Buffett throughout the 80s, it's interesting, like he did become the second biggest stockholder in the Washington Post and acquired a controlling financial stake in ABC television in the 80s. And we had mentioned before that ABC kind of had a run on it in, I think, 1985 or 86, where this mysterious like private equity company, Capital Cities, who had before 1980, I think its biggest like shareholder was William Casey, bought out all of ABC and like took it over. So I think Warren Buffett was in the mix on that financial deal. He, I think, might have bought a large interest in ABC. So, I mean, it almost makes you wonder, like, was Buffett kind of a cutout man for buying up companies that maybe people like William J. Casey and his crowd wanted to have control over? And if that's the case, then, you know, is it easy? I don't know. Is it believable that he was not good friends with the person that like loves William J. Casey so much, Larry King, and was doing all these other things? I don't know. It's just there was also there's a strange connection I'll mention briefly where like Buffett had he kind of bought a paper, the Omaha Sun, in the early 70s when he was kind of on his rise up, and it was the Sun that published this big financial takedown story about Boys Town, the Catholic orphanage charity, in 1972, and they actually won a Pulitzer for this reporting. And I guess people at the paper later said that like the idea for the story originated with Warren Buffett, and he wanted to do the story to like expose kind of shady, kind of like a little bit of financial impropriety, nothing about abusing boys or anything like that, but kind of questioning like, you know, you guys have pulled in so much money from donations, but like you haven't expanded, and you still have the same amount of people you had like 20 years ago, and like where's all that money going? And it was like it was more than a little embarrassing to Boys Town, and so they had to do like a financial shakeup in the 70s after these articles came out, and they had to kind of I don't know, I think they had to bring in a lot of outside people onto the board to establish a kind of new era of like financial openness and blah, blah, blah. And then they rapidly expanded throughout the 70s and 80s from, I think, having about 1,000 kids on their, you know, property, compound, campus, to having over like 12,000. Wow. The Father Val Peter brags about in one of their like promotional documentaries. So they went like a tenfold increase in the amount of kids that they had there, and then that perfectly coincided with Larry King kind of ingratiated himself into Boys Town throughout the 80s and actually managed a lot of money. A lot of Boys Town's money was deposited at Franklin Credit Union. And he, it seems, almost had a kind of, it reminds me of the Jimmy Savile case, another really horrifying one that involves child abuse and Satanism, where because he was like this big charity guy, he got carte blanche to go into all the orphanages and hospitals and, you know, cancer wards. And, you know, it seemed like Larry King had developed this special financial relationship with Boys Town that allowed him to just like go there, and like he would hire like boys from Boys Town to like work at the credit union in like strange capacities. And he was at the same time, like all these kids alleged, was basically like going to Boys Town to like pick out orphans that he could sex traffic essentially, or invite to these parties.
That's what's like so like shocking about the like very hard stance against any of this stuff that like they've like that the like the media or like some people have taken, because like even the grand jury did find that he was guilty of adult pandering, and like that Alan Baer was.
Yeah, you mean the civil case from the late 90s where a $1 million like default judgment?
Not even that. That was just kind of by default, like all of, we should definitely move on to talking about Paul Bonacci at some point, but, all of his accusations by default, because Larry King didn't contest them. But even before that, Larry King was sort of found guilty of, I'll just read this from Nick Bryant's book. The grand jury, quote, found probable cause that Larry King, quote, used money or items of value to procure men in their late teens or early 20s, and thus committed the crime of pandering, adult pandering. But the majority of these activities occurred in the early 80s, so the statute of limitations was up. The grand jury prudently decided that since King was facing 40 felony counts in federal court, it would defer his prosecution to the feds, right? Should the matter pending against King in the federal system come to naught, we implore state authorities to act on the overwhelming evidence against King relating to both pandering and theft offenses. So the idea, he was never charged with a single count of pandering anyway, but the grand jury did find it. So, the whole idea that like there's nothing to this at all, even though he used money in the 80s
on
to
its
procure
face is
kids in their
ridiculous.
teens, but like to say like also the report noted the grand jury didn't subpoena King because he invariably would have taken refuge behind the Fifth Amendment. The report also commented on King's psychiatric malady. Evidence and testimony heard regarding the issue of King's incompetence to stand trial for his crimes have shown much disagreement on the incompetency ruling.
That sounds very, very Twinkie defense.
Yeah,
like Dan White shooting Moscone and Harvey Milk.
Yeah, he I guess was crazy. Anyway, but actually, I did. It was kind of an oversight on my part to not put this together, but I think maybe this is her real name. Nick Bryant does talk about who's called Loretta Smith in the Camps book as Shawnetta Moore. And she did actually testify, but she wasn't charged with perjury very benevolently because she was a 17-year-old, and she was undergoing therapy at the time.
Oh, I see. So she wasn't legally an adult yet, so they didn't go after her.
Well, they could have, but they said the young woman was in their treatment of a therapist, and possible prosecution would be counterproductive to further rehabilitation and would not be in the girl's best interest. So very benevolently, they decided to, and she did say kind of that it's hard for her to distinguish between reality and fantasy because of her heavy drug and alcohol use at the time. So they were like, well, we could prosecute her for perjury, but, she is trying to become mentally more healthy. So I think let's, just let it. And they, dismissed what she said. And there was another person, Euless Washington, who had similar allegations of a similar nature, but the well was kind of poisoned because they associated them with Michael Casey, and one other person who they kind of smeared to sink this was Kirsten Hallberg, who was kind of. There's actually a lot of interesting information about the whole Loretta Smith / Shawnetta Moore stuff here from the point of view of Kristen Hallberg, who was her therapist. And it's actually like pretty sad because she basically received within the hospital, as you said, like everything's very interconnected, like everyone's kind of in bed with each other. And like her supervisors at the hospital, like just to read some of the like chilling things that she was told or that happened related to her kind of. She was the first person who she really opened up to. She even said that Hallberg charted Moore's allegations about her involvement in a pornography and prostitution ring. Then she approached her supervisor about the allegations. Hallberg told her supervisor that she knew of a girl who had also attended the girls' club and made similar allegations. She suggested they contact the Nebraska State Patrol. Hallberg recalled that her supervisor became very agitated at the suggestion, replying that Hallberg would be breaching confidentiality statutes if she single-handedly contacted the authorities. Hallberg assumed her supervisor contacted the authorities and also Moore's mother, but, probably he didn't, or she didn't. Shawnetta Moore didn't really trust anybody else, and she writes, or Brian writes, Hallberg gradually began to have gnawing suspicions that Uta Haley, that's the hospital's personnel, might be covering up malfeasance, and her reservations produced some mounting discomfort. She wasn't absolutely certain her suspicions were well-founded, and there were times when she felt terrible about even having these suspicions. However, her supervisor's reaction to Moore's allegations made her extremely uneasy, and she heard unsubstantiated rumors that girls were sneaking off campus in the middle of the night. She voiced her concerns to a coworker. Hallberg's concerns quickly ricocheted back to her supervisor, who informed her that everything was fine. Hallberg's supervisor also seemed to be overly concerned with the relative ease with which certain residents confided in Hallberg. Her supervisor suggested that she interrupt the girls who confided in her to ask, "Are you sure you can trust me with this information?"
What?
Hallberg's imagine someone comes to you to tell you something about this, and you're being told by your supervisor to say "Can you trust me with this?" Almost saying you shouldn't trust me.
Basically
don't
intimidate
tell me.
them.
So all very upsetting stuff.
For me, it was very clear that the case was not investigated and not pursued because of the alleged perpetrators.
Those perpetrators named by the children formed a ring of rich and powerful pedophiles in Omaha. Men from industry, politics, the media, even the police. Besides Larry King, ringleaders were department store billionaire Alan Baer and the celebrity columnist of the Omaha World Herald newspaper, Peter Citron.
Alan Baer was a sick fuck. didn't care, wanted sex, nasty, I don't even know if you can call it sex, and take it any way he can get it, pay for it, he'd like to, but if he had to take it by force, he would.
King would also provide underage girls for abuse. Alicia Rowan was 15 when she attended her first party.
I met some guys there that were from Boys Town, and it was at that party that I met Larry King. At the time that I met Larry King, I did not know that he was Larry King. I had met him. That was the first time I'd ever met him.
I think there's a few people we could go through in terms of that had like very personal stakes. We've already gone through Omaha World Herald, and of course Chief Bob Wadman was accused by Alicia Owen and was referenced by other people. But when I guess when this investigation started getting underway, DeCamp went to the special agent in charge of the FBI's field office in Omaha, who was a guy named Nick O'Hara, and he, according to DeCamp, he made it clear that probably his closest friend in the world was Police Chief Robert Wadman, and that anyone who would dare to accuse Wadman of impropriety had better realize that in accusing Wadman, they were effectively taking on Nick O'Hara and the FBI. I mean, okay, so they were best friends in the whole world, and rather brazen reaction by this this FBI guy, and basically saying, how dare you, essentially, even think to accuse this guy who's my friend. There's another bizarre quote here that about Harold Anderson, that who was the former publisher of the Omaha World Herald, and I think the Herald had published. Let me just see. It's on page 94 here. Let's see. Yeah, okay. So, in the Kansas City Star in 1990, after the DeCamp memo outlining, a lot of these allegations circulated, the Kansas City Star wrote a very nasty article called "Former Legislator's Angry Memo Turns Sober Nebraska on Its Ear." And it bemoans, DeCamp's memo found its way to dozens of copy machines and quickly littered the state, spawning a swirl of gossip. Hardly modest, DeCamp takes credit for convening the grand juries. Quote, "If it had not been for that memo, there would not even be a grand jury investigation today," DeCamp contends. DeCamp had the audacity to name, among others, Harold Anderson, former publisher of the Omaha World Herald. DeCamp left the implication that Anderson, an icon of journalism who lunches with President Bush, had a fetish for children. Said one politician, "It was like insulting God." Yeah. And that really kind of that I think encapsulates the attitude of people of saying, an icon of journalism who lunches with President Bush could have a fetish for children. That is like insulting God. And that's definitely how the government, which was, it should be mentioned, like Bush was the president at this time, that's how they reacted to it at almost every level, with the exception of like the Foster Care Review Board and the legislative investigation, in the Nebraska legislature, and people like, Gary Caradori, and everybody else was just like incredibly, as Troy Bonner said, like it will not be believed. And President Bush, it should be mentioned, Loretta Smith, or correct me, what was her?
Shawnetta Moore.
Shawnetta Moore. Okay, yeah. Well, so she mentioned being taken to the parties from the Omaha, the Girls Club of Omaha, which, by the way, was co-founded by none other than Larry King, which was discovered in the investigation. She describes being taken there by the Webb girls, who were some girls, I think, that were in like a foster home that were also early alleged abuse by like Larry King. And so Nellie Webb also gave, let's see, it was Nellie and Kimberly Webb were both, I think, by a social worker, interviewed them, and what she said was, Julie Walters interviewed them, and her report said, Nellie also accompanied Mr. and Mrs. King and their son Prince on trips to Chicago, New York, and Washington, D.C., beginning when she was 15 years old. She missed 22 days of school, almost totally due to these trips. Nellie was taken along on the pretense of being Prince's babysitter. Here we go. Last year, she met Vice President George Bush and saw him again at one of the parties Larry gave while on a Washington, D.C. trip. At some of the parties, there are just men, as was the case at the party George Bush attended, older men and younger men in their early 20s. Nellie said she has seen sodomy committed at those parties. At other parties during Larry trips, Larry had local prostitutes in their 20s and 30s there to entertain his male guests. At these parties, Nellie said every guest had a bodyguard, and she saw some of the men wearing guns. All guests had to produce a card, which was run through a machine to verify the guest was, in fact, who they said they were, and then each guest was frisked down before entering the party. And DeCamp just writes, this is not the last time the name of George Bush would surface in the Franklin affair, and it's certainly not, but that's interesting. So there were kids here that saw Vice President George Bush at Larry King parties, including parties where, not saying, I don't think there's any, did Nick Bryant give any anecdotes of Bush actually seen engaging in any kind of sexual activity, or simply that he was in fact there at multiple parties in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, definitely they were friends, but there was nothing actually, like, he was close friends with, Bush, and he hosted, like, a gala for him and everything, Bush, praised the World Herald and everything.
Yep.
They were close with that, but I don't think there was anything. Yeah, and of course the connection that we brought up before about, his presidency possibly being jeopardized by some of the stuff that were connected to him, but I don't, at least I didn't see anything. I'm searching now for his name. I just skimming it, I don't see anything that would say that, he actually was seen doing any of this stuff, involved in any kind of, satanic ritual, but certainly Larry King was.
I don't think he was. I don't think he was actually ever seen by any of these kids. Said that he was at the ritual, but he would kind of be present at these parties. And I think the way that some of the kids would describe them, I think in the Conspiracy of Silence documentary, is that oftentimes there would be a cocktail party, and these politicos and government people would all be there, and some of the kids would be, maybe the teenage kids might be present for that part of the party, but then at a certain point, kind of the square crowd leaves, and then there's a certain amount of people in the party who stick around, and then that's when the drugs come out, and then that's when the underage kids come out, and then the party turns into a crazy. I mean, the things that Troy Bonner describes Larry King doing, he was really, I think he called him he was a sick fuck. I think his testimony of making kids put their arms together and dropping a lit cigarette between them, and he has all these cigarette burns all over his arm that he claims were, Larry King would just put out a cigarette on him and stuff like that, and using a squash as a sex object on a 10-year-old boy, and just really twisted shit. So it's yeah, but George Bush was there maybe, an hour or two before the squash comes out, and the heroin and the cocaine, and then, the people that were kind of working under him, people like Donald Gregg and Craig Spence, who, did brag about having Secret Service protection during a lot of this time. And also claimed that the midnight tours of the White House that he took some of these teenage boys on, including Paul Benassi, I think, who says in Conspiracy of Silence that he was taken by Craig Spence on a midnight tour of the White House, and that Craig Spence, I think, Bryant says that Craig Spence said that those trips were arranged by Donald Gregg. And we've already gone over Donald Gregg, very close to HW, and was actually made the ambassador to South Korea under President Bush 1, and was a CIA Phoenix program operator, and and involved deeply in Iran-Contra, like deeply in Iran-Contra.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is like, if you add all this together, you're seeing that Bush is like, he is present. He's present with the Contra stuff. He's present with the drugs. He's present with the pedophile rings and the blackmail rings and all this shit.
Yeah, and the drug, peddling, is deeply enmeshed in all this stuff, like the stuff that we talked about vis-a-vis the bringing of drugs into the country.
Yes.
That's all through kind of this is, I think that it's makes sense to think of this as a hub, at least, or a node, in the same way as Mena, Arkansas.
Yes, actually, I wanted to bring that up about Wadman because John DeCamp makes some very interesting allegations about. This is from Senator Ernie Chambers, who was one of the senators who was kind of an ally of DeCamp and Lauren Schmidt in the Senate investigation. He's actually still alive today and is still a state senator from North Omaha, which is Larry King's stomping grounds. And he's, I think, for a long time, maybe the first and only African-American legislator, and also the only openly atheist legislator in the entire United States, which is very interesting that he ends up on the side of the Christians and the Satanic Panic people, even though he literally, I saw in 2007, sued God to prove a point about frivolous lawsuits. Anyways, but he does.
John DeCamp, wasn't John DeCamp God's lawyer or something in that?
I don't know if actually they faced off in that trial, but Senator Ernie Chambers did say some very interesting things. I just want to read this quote, which kind of blew me away a little bit. And he, December 19th, 1988, as the Franklin investigation was getting underway, and he says, quote, "My community is ravaged by drugs. We see the Omaha police picking up kids from 14 to 18 years old with a half an ounce or less of these narcotic substances, and that is supposed to be fighting the drugs. These are nickel and dime pushers, not suppliers, not mid-level suppliers. A few days ago, the Douglas County Sheriff got together with some of the county sheriffs, one was from Sarpy, and they made a raid, and they got 1.5 pounds of heavy drugs, some money, and some weapons. They didn't tell the Omaha police, and I talked to the Douglas County attorney, and I told him I was glad they didn't tell them, because had the Omaha police been notified, this drug bust would have never occurred. They would have told the individual they would have not gotten a substantial amount of the drugs. These nickel and dime people in my community that they were arresting don't have the connections or the money to bring in the amount of drugs into the city of Omaha that are coming. And certainly the little piddling amounts that are picked up by the police have no meaning or significance. When we wanted, as a community, to help organize and work with the task force of black officers to address the drug problem and the gang problem, Chief Wadman fought it tooth and nail and did not want it, wanted to deny that the problem existed. And I said the only reason that a police official would be opposed to this kind of action is because he knows something or he's part of it. And
that's definitely the first time a cop has been let's not do a war on drugs.
Yeah, and on top of that, here we go. This is a little wild. I mean, one of Caradori's informants told him that Wadman was instrumental in bringing the drug trafficking gangs, the Los Angeles-based Bloods and Crips, into Omaha. According to a June 19, 1989 report by Caradori's predecessor of the Franklin Committee, Jerry Lowe, members of the Bloods and Crips were identified by local police as driving Larry King's car. So there you go. I mean, in terms of spreading out these drug networks, as we talked about in the Smuggler's Blues episode, where the Crips and the Bloods started spreading around to all these other cities in the country and were selling cocaine and crack and everything, and suddenly they were everywhere. This allegation is that Wadman was instrumental in setting that up, and then, just like we had said, this is a great vindication of that quote-unquote black conspiracy theory that the law enforcement and justice system and the government and the CIA, etc., all conspired to deliberately set up this paradigm where there'd be violent drug-dealing gangs, and then you would basically arrest the small fries and throw a bunch of people in jail and make a lot of money off that. And then meanwhile, you are kind of controlling the ebb and flow of the drug trade because it's all coming from CIA, sources. And then, linking that up with the girl, I forget who said it, in that one allegation of going to one of these early parties where they were promised, there's so much cocaine, you're going to think it's snowing. And You know, I mean, where did that cocaine come from? It seemed like Larry King had like an unlimited supply, you know, maybe a government hookup, you know, maybe, you know, he had a little guy from Mina sending it up there, not too far. And yeah, so it's like once you start digging into this, there's also, you know, allegations throughout this whole thing that Larry King was laundering money for the Contras. So you even have that aspect of it kind of link up where, let's see, there's a whole scandal with like AmeriCares, which was connected to Covenant House and was lauded by the Reagan and Bush administrations as a showcase for the privatization of social services. And they were expanding into like Guatemala, and according to Camp says, according to intelligence community sources, the purpose was procurement of children from South America for exploitation in a pedophile ring. And the flagship Guatemalan mission of Covenant House was launched by a former business partner of Nicaraguan dictator Anastasio Somoza, Roberto Alejos Arzu, who had ties to the CIA, according to the Village Voice. The Voice quoted Jean-Marie Simon, author of Guatemala, Eternal Spring, Eternal Tyranny, quote, "It's like having Idi Amin on the board of Amnesty International." And Covenant House is funded by Robert McCauley, founder of AmeriCares, a service organization implicated in channeling funds to the Contras. A close friend of the Bush family since Connecticut, Andover, and Yale days, McCauley has George Bush's brother Prescott on the AmeriCares board. And then there was a priest who was later outed as a pedophile, who's the vice president. Father Ritter was the vice president of AmeriCares. You know, so like you just see these people that are involved in Iran-Contra are all involved in stuff with Larry King. I forget the name of the organization. It was like, you know, Americans for Freedom. Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was actually seen, at least by one witness, reported to be at a party thrown by Larry King. Yeah, there were constant rumors that that King was financing the Contras and was probably laundering money for the CIA, and records do show that Larry King was a top contributor to a Contra support committee, the Citizens for America. King's own public relations firm was also used by the Contras. We might have even talked about that in our one of our other Contra episodes. DeCamp says he also did hear a lot of reports over the years that certain people in Omaha were charging that Omaha Police Chief Bob Wadman was protecting the expansion of the Crips and Bloods into Omaha, far from their home turf in Los Angeles.
I think Alicia Owen actually, in her statement to Caradori, she said that she had transported drugs from California to Nebraska for Larry King. So I don't know if that, like, you know, would necessarily bring the Bloods in the Crips, or that's, you know, but definitely, like, obviously the California connection is very prominent because they all talk about flying to California. And
100%. And there were some Hollywood producers, no really big names, like famous names, but they were going to LA a lot. I mean, Paul Benassi, as we'll probably get to shortly, did claim to have been taken to Bohemian Grove one time and participate in snuff films.
We should
directed by
talk.
Hunter S. Thompson.
We should give him his own. But quickly, this is an interesting little tidbit also about Owen on that same beat. So, Special Agent Mott of the FBI, he was sort of painting a picture of Alicia Owen. Bryant writes, he painted such a sordid, pathological portrait of Owen that it was nearly impossible to distinguish her from one of Charlie Manson's harem. Go ahead. But it's interesting. Mott told the trial jury a rather fanciful tale about Owen's experiences dealing and taking LSD that made her seem a peer of Timothy Leary. He discussed Owen's clandestine visit to an acid lab and said Owen took LSD for 30 days straight. He gave the lowdown on an acid deal Owen attempted to put together with the Sons of Silence motorcycle gang. Mott testified that Owen planned to purchase 100 sheets of acid from the gang. Each sheet contained 100 hits of acid. Mott then brought his experience to bear and informed the jury that a hit was one dosage unit. Mott even provided detailed nuances of the deal. The Sons of Silence were wholesaling the acid to Owen at 25 cents a hit. Mott elaborated that Owen conscripted a major drug dealer in North Omaha who dealt with the Crips and Bloods to help her move copious amounts of acid.
Wow.
He was kind of suggesting that she was involved in, bringing acid over through the Crips and Bloods. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe a projection situation. But
exactly. I mean, because motorcycle gangs. I mean, we probably
well, yeah,
gotta add them to the list because they've been instrumental. Yeah, with like Kenneth Anger and Altamont, the Hells Angels, and
true. Yeah.
they've really been instrumental in like drug trafficking. In throughout kind of the last 60, 70 years, and they pop up in strange places. I actually never heard of the Sons of Silence before, but I'm just glancing at them. It's
name.
Also, like, why was she locked in like an acid lab taking acid for 30 days straight? That sounds very like Beyond the Black Rainbow. And
I don't.
bizarre.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact that you would think that she's just like a scumbag druggie instead of like who put her in a like, under what circumstances did she end up in an underground, I don't know, I'm just imagining like an underground bunker or something where she's taking acid straight. I just wanted to mention, like, just interestingly that he compared her to Charles Manson, because guess who spent a couple years at Boys Town Orphanage when he was a young man?
Wow.
Yup.
That's crazy.
There's a newspaper article with a photo of him, and he, I mean, he was kind of an orphan boy a little bit, and he spent years at Boys Town. And I think there's decent evidence that I think he was probably sexually abused, maybe by fellow boys there. DeCamp quotes some other graduates of Boys Town from like the 60s and the 50s, 60s, and 70s that said that like sexual abuse and things like that were like absolutely rampant. And that I think he said even like he estimated that like 1 in 3 of the adult workers there was a pedophile, and there was like no accountability whatsoever. And so, yeah, I mean, interesting that Charlie Manson came out of this milieu long before anybody suspected it, and it should be said, like, this all came out like over 10 years before anybody had any confirmation about the Catholic Church being involved in an extremely vast conspiracy to cover up the abuse of children in parishes. So like it almost feels like trite or like trivial to sort of dwell on that now that it's so universally accepted that was a phenomenon. But it's like that I think almost people forget that we didn't know that, or that was highly speculative or not really taken seriously prior to like 2002. But I think definitely in the case of, calling out a place like Boys Town and having this like, crazy abuse rings that were covered up by Boys Town and et cetera, I think it's pretty damn vindicating that they were on this tip, but also expanding broader, because I think the other like meme that gets pushed about, I think, the Catholic Church scandal is that somehow this was a behavior that was completely unique to the Catholic Church, whereas I don't actually believe that the evidence kind of backs that up. I think if you look at the abuse rates in public schools, in like the Boy Scouts, my God, in other religious kind of groupings and things like that, and obviously in various kind of government contexts, that this was like a widespread, interconnected social problem, particularly in these decades, like the 70s and the 80s. And but these people there are things that were seen as absolutely unthinkable in like 1990, that Boys Town, the most like respected boys charity, could be involved in such a thing. Now it's almost like, well, duh, like it's the least shocking thing in the world that this orphanage in Nebraska was covering up, abusive kids. We just blew past 2 hours. Do you want to take a break now and come back and like do a Benassi?
Michael Casey and then Benassi, I think, would be good.
Dive into the more sticky parts of the case.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think that's
cool.
Good. Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'll pause it.
This time.